Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ukeme Falade, and I am the Chief Financial Officer with World Council of Credit Unions. Thank you for being here this afternoon. And so I will be moderating today's session, and please, following the session, we'll have a Q&A session with our presenter, and we recommend that you submit your questions through the app. And to do that, I'm sure you've done this throughout the conference. You go into the conference app, click on the top left corner, Q&A, select the date, select the session, and pose your questions there. So please, and also do not forget to complete the survey. At the end, there's a prize to be won with that, which is, if I can divulge, a free attendance to next year's conference. So please don't forget to submit your Q&A as well as complete the survey at the end of the conference. And so just a little housekeeping, if you can please put your phones in silence, please. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Ruben Ugarte. Please take it away.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Ukeme. And Ukeme will actually stay on stage to help us with Q&A. I will actually be pausing throughout the session to hear any questions you might have. So put them in the app, and then we'll cover them throughout and at the end. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Vancouver. A beautiful rainy day here in Vancouver. And today, I have a few things I want to talk about. But I want to start with an exercise. Imagine they have a brick. If you see Vancouver, it's a city under construction as it tries to keep up with demand. But if you had a brick, what kind of use cases could you have for this brick? Besides the obvious one of construction, right? And if you want to share it out, that's also fine, right? For example, you could use the brick as a paperweight, right? Any ideas from the audience?
Art.
Sorry?
Art.
Art, perfect, yeah. I heard something here? As a chair, okay, yes, like a meditation chair, yeah. One more? A weapon, yes, of course. So, this is a very simple question, but it gets to one of the things I want to start with today, which is diversity of ideas, right? And the title for this session is something like making diversity last beyond the job application. But I want to say right now, this is not a DEI presentation. That's not my expertise. I won't be talking about that. Instead, I want to talk about three things. One, diversity of ideas. What does that mean? How does it help you make better decisions? The second, how do you improve your organization's decision-making processes? And we'll look at why that matters and some ideas for doing that. And the third, how do you actually make decisions in a hybrid world? One of the most common challenges I hear from organizations today. So, I'll go for about 30, 40 minutes and cover Q&A. Now, there is no slides, so nothing to look at, just the few points I want to share with you. So let's jump in. Diversity of ideas, right? So think in your organizations, where do ideas come from, right? Are they coming from the same people, perhaps management, executives? Are they coming from the same places, maybe from the same conferences, the same educational blogs, videos, whatever? And that determines the kind of decisions you make, right? If the same people make the same decisions, then you sort of get the same results. And if you look at something like Undercover Boss, right, this TV show that I don't even know if it still runs, the huge idea on Undercover Boss is that you can take the CEO, you put him down at the front level, and he learns all these things about the organization, right, that they never knew. But it's a really fascinating way of thinking about it, where those frontline employees obviously had those ideas, but there was perhaps no way of sharing them up the chain, so to speak. So they never made it to the boss, and they actually had to go on the cover, so to speak. If you think about a hotel, which I'm sure all of you are staying here, unless you live here in Vancouver, the person who knows best how to improve the customer experience of the lobby when a customer arrives to check in is really the doorman, right, or the door person. They see everyone come in, and there's some hotels that I'm sure you've seen where you walk in and it's incredibly confusing. It's not quite clear where the reception desk is, what's going on, you're tired, you just want to check in. Maybe you're not sure if there's an app, right? Like some hotels not let you check in via the app. But the door person sees all this, and it sees that a layout could be improved if you added a sign here or a sign there, or if you made it much more clear that reception is this way and not that way, right? I was in a hotel in Boston recently where I went in the wrong level. It's like the basement level, but the check-in was upstairs, not very clear. But how do you get the doorman or door person to be able to provide these ideas up the chain, right? How do you get them so the executive, whoever the chief executive of customer experience, doesn't really have to come in. They can just hear these ideas come up, right? And that's really where the diversity of ideas starts to become really valuable. As you get these different ideas from different people, you can start to make different decisions. And that's where, at least for me, it becomes very interesting. So 3 things that we want to start looking at when we want to improve this diversity of ideas to make it more applicable. And I was thinking about this, that for this audience, credit unions, it's actually a perfect topic. You know, the first credit union was created back in Germany in the 19th century around this common bond, a profession it used to be, or something like that. So in a way, you know, this idea of membership and members is completely normal for credit unions. So getting ideas from different people becomes very obvious and helpful. So the first thing, are you really surveying your employees? Are you asking employees for ideas? I noticed this trend that organizations today really like feedback. You know, everyone asks for feedback, right? The airline, the hotel, the Airbnb, the Uber, they all want this 5-star question or the NPS question. And it's feedback after feedback after feedback from customers, right? And it's sort of been drilled in after years of conferences like this, probably, that you want to ask feedback. But are you doing the same for your employees? Are you actually giving them the chance to provide feedback in a survey, in a video format, in some kind of in-person format, a video call, whatever it may be, in the same level or the same level of intensity as organizations do right now with customers, that same level of persistence? And if you're not doing that regularly, every week, every month, every quarter, you're missing out, right? You hear from young employees that what they really want is to say. They want a voice, to be able to say, you know, this is what I think could be better here. How do I share that, right? Who do I tell? How do I make this idea a reality of sorts? So that's the first thing. How often are you actually really asking employees, and how consistently are you asking employees for their feedback at all levels of organizations? The second thing is, what do you actually do with ideas? You know, I call it closing the loop. And I had an organization that hosts town halls every month. And they invite everyone, you know, executives, frontline employees, managers. And you spend time in this small town hall just simply discussing and hearing about the latest news in the organization. It's very casual. But one of the things they do well is in that town hall, they'll close the loop on previous ideas. They'll literally say, you know, 3 months ago, someone suggested we did this marketing idea, and we consider it, but we're not doing it. Or, you know, someone suggested this, and now that's in progress. It'll be out next quarter. So what you start to do is you start showing employees that it's not just you're asking for ideas, you're actually using them in some way. They're influencing the decisions, the strategy that you're making. So it's not just a one-way conversation, you know, employees talking to a wall or really not being heard at all. So this is a simple way that every team can start doing it, every unit, every division, just to simply figure out, yes, we're open to ideas, and we're actually doing something with them. You know, at the very least, we're considering the ideas. And the third thing I want to talk about is this idea of how do you actually involve people in strategy? You know, one of the things I help organizations do is formulate strategies. And it's always with high-level executives, a small group, 6, 8, 10 people, 12 people. But there's always a question of how do we actually get the rest of the organization involved in some way? Practically speaking, you know, I cannot have 100 people come in and do a strategy or a strategy session. It's just unfeasible. But there's been ways to get employees to provide their opinion, you know, and some of the pre-work questions to have a say as to what they think is going well, what they think could be improved. And this can be done, again, surveys, videos, audios, different ways of doing it. Those town halls is another great way. But you start to involve people in the say as to where the organization is going. So by the time the strategy comes back down and an organization says, this is where we're heading in the next 18 months, 2 years, there's been an opportunity for people to say, yes, I wanted to contribute. This is what I thought we could be doing. And I can see some of those elements made it into the strategy. Right? So asking employees consistently, regularly, their opinion as to what could be improved. Being able to close the loop on those questions, so on the suggestions, so employees know that things are being heard, that it's actually not going into a void somewhere. And of course, finding a way to involve them in strategy, especially when strategies today are becoming much more fluid and much more shorter. So there's many more opportunities for people to say, yes, I can suggest an idea, I can help in some way. And by improving the diversity of ideas in the organization, you can start to make different decisions, which I want to talk about in the next section. So, okay, any questions on the app?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah. So if you have any questions, put them on. I will be stopping along the way. I do want to hear from you. It will make it much more interesting for everybody. You can't figure out how to use the app. Oh.
I can provide feedback, but I don't know where to ask the question.
I'm definitely not the technical
so-
support, but maybe Ukeme can help you. Let's take a 60-second break here to see how this is done.
On your app,
This is where I am.
no, you would need to go to the main screen. Okay. Go
So
to
my
home.
question is, if you're not at the executive level,
Yeah.
how do you influence the executive to start including you in those conversations?
Of course. Okay. So I'll repeat it for the audience through the magic of technology.
Then you just
The question is,
click on the date.
if you're not at the executive level, you're a manager, you're a coordinator, a sales rep, how do you actually influence executives to have an influence in the decision making? You know, there's a few things you can do. I find for younger employees who really want this, who are very driven, you know, there's always an opportunity to be proactive, reaching out to a manager with ideas, and ideas that make sense. It's not just, hey, we should do this, but here's some data, here's what we think, this worked well, this is why I think this worked well. So, you know, there's a proactivity that non-executive individuals can start doing, while also trying to work with teams and helping executives know that today is different, you know. I think for a lot of executives, they still think that they're being hired to make big decisions, right? You're the CEO, you're the CMO, you brought here to make the big decisions. The reality is executives are really hired to get results. Whether you make the decisions or not, it's not as important as it used to be. So trying to work with executives to let them know that you can help them, you can take things off their plate, right? Executives are typically quite busy. You can help them with the research, you can help them figure out this element that you're looking at, that kind of thing, right? All from the perspective of how can I help you, executive, do more, right? How can I help you tackle things and so on? So that's really the start. But I understand, of course, in some organizations it's not as easy. There's much more stronger silos. It might have a very old school, you know, sort of command and control structure, which comes from World War II. But that's always a start. Did you figure out the app?
No, but I asked my question.
Okay. If you actually shout your questions too, I'll take them, I'll repeat them through the mic as well. So we can do that if technology doesn't cooperate with us. Okay, next. So we got diversity of ideas. Now let's talk about decision making, right? And decision making is really intriguing. Every organization makes decisions, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But how do you improve it, right? And the first thing that I want to talk about is this idea of decision speed. And it's a cliche to say that the world is changing fast. We hear it all the time, right? We went through this pandemic and this and that. But there's a metric, which I call decision speed, which I actually think most organizations should be tracking in some shape or form. And just simply looking at how quickly do you actually make decisions? Not the minor stuff, like where you go for lunch or where your executive retreat might be, but the bigger ones, like strategy, how long does it take you to hire an individual, executive or not? How long does it take you to formulate strategy, right? Which should be done in a matter of days, not so much months. So by having this metric, you can start to really unearth what's actually happening in an organization. And when companies start tracking this, it can be very surprising. Maybe it wasn't really obvious that it actually takes them 9 months to hire someone, and it's a very lengthy process. Or their strategy formulation process took 7 months. So just even by tracking it, you start to actually shape and change how fast you move at it. It's, in most places, you don't know it. And I have a 2-year-old golden retriever puppy. And in my building, there's other dogs, of course. And there's another dog that looks like Scooby-Doo, if you've ever seen the TV show. And one day, I was coming home from the grocery store. I had some food, like ham and things like that. And the dog was in the lobby. It saw me. And as I was saying hi to the owner, the dog sort of like sneakily went up to my grocery bag, grabbed the ham from my bag, and then sort of ran away with it very quick. I had no time to see it. And if you look at dogs, their decision speed is very quick, right? The moment they see something, they go for it. Their attention span sometimes leaves things to be desired, but they're very quick at making decisions. And organizations today need to have that quickness by far and large. We can find exceptions. We can find situations where it might be prudent to go a little bit slower, but by far and large, when we're talking about marketing and sales and new products, innovation, speed is really the name of the game today. And again, this is obvious. I don't have to say it. But by tracking it, by having decision speed as a metric, you can actually start to really put a number behind it and understand what this is actually looking like. Now, I want to try something. I see enough people here. I would love to take a 5-minute exercise where you turn to someone next to you, if you have someone next to you, or in front of you, or behind you, and you talk for 2 minutes about what your organization does or how quickly your organization makes decisions. Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it different? So let's do that. So let's spend 2 minutes, one person, and then 2 minutes, the other person. And I will shadow switch. So let's do that. Let's try it. So go. I was working with an organization recently that does political work. They're in the political environment. And it's very tough. And they try to be nonpartisan and things like that. The reality is, as you allow for more diversity of ideas, you increase the probability that there'll be disagreements, that there'll be chaos, as the person here mentioned. And it's, I think, something that you cannot completely avoid. You can minimize it by ensuring you're not trying to wade into some topics depending on what your organization believes, right? Some organizations want to be political, and you want to make statements, right? Nike is an example. They want to make statements when things happen. Delta is another example. But not every organization needs to do that. So you have to make choices. There can be constraints as to what topics you want to discuss. A lot of the political stuff might fall around, away from that. And maintaining this goal that employees and team members may not like each other, but they'll respect each other, right? They'll respect their opinions, and they'll respect their approaches. I think so, yeah, there's a question there. Is there a mic? You want to try that mic, see if that works?
Yeah, so my statement question is that many times organizations believe that the right to make fast decisions is very much dependent on the work they have in hand. So they prioritize what they're doing instead of making those important decisions, and that's the excuse for not making it fast enough. So I think, can you talk about the opportunity lost or the opportunity cost of not making a decision fast enough? Because I think that's the metric that forces us to understand that something gets lost when you don't make those decisions quickly. Because too many times I hear, oh, we're doing our day jobs, we're so busy. Yes, we want to do that, but we have to prioritize.
This may bring a second point that I talk about decision speed as how long it takes to make a decision, but perhaps there's also an element of decision opportunity cost, using your language, where it becomes clear that if you just do your day job, if you just put out fires, as I see a lot of organizations do, right? You're really good firefighters, but you're sort of missing the point that the entire forest is burning, right? The forest is sort of disappearing in front of your eyes. There's something there, there's something there about trying to quantify how much market share you might be missing out of, how much customer demands or client demands, how much missed sales you may be missing out because you're not moving fast enough. So I think this is a completely valid metric. It gets a little trickier, of course, as you start to think about it, but I think a lot of teams do have an intuitive sense that if you do not get back to a customer fast enough, or if you don't respond to demand fast enough, you will lose out on something. You lose out on sales, some tangible number. And making that more clear starts to shift the priorities to say, yes, this is important, the day-to-day, but this is the future, right? And how do we find that balance between the present and the future? OK, so let me move on to my content. Let me see where I am. So thank you for the collaboration. Next is frameworks. We're talking about how do you actually make decisions and what this looks like. There's lots of frameworks out there for making decisions, 6 steps, 7 steps, 5 steps. I have one that's 3 steps. I'm not saying it's better, but it's only 3 steps. And I talk about outcomes, options, and obstacles. And an outcome is what you want to accomplish. More sales, more revenue, more profit, fewer customer complaints, fewer returns, fewer issues, technical issues, whatever. Options is how you get there. New products, new ads, new creatives, new technology. And then the obstacles are the things that get in the way of that. You may have pushback from the IT department, or you don't have resources. You're not privy to decisions. You're not sure how to actually make this happen. So a very simple framework. And the point of the framework is not to use this. You can use your own framework. You can have your own language. You can add more steps or remove steps. But it's to have a framework. And I think when you have the framework and you share it with your team, it becomes more clear and less random. As I was preparing, of course, we have Elon Musk and a new rebranding of Twitter to like X.com. I don't quite get it, but I think if you look at Elon Musk and Twitter in particular, I think what you see is a lot of random decisions happen by him. Some are right, some are not, but you never quite know where you're going to get, right? You never quite know when you wake up and this will happen or that will happen. And that's a really tough environment to work in. There's no certainty that you'll have a job tomorrow, or that whatever decisions are being made are sort of following some kind of framework. Even if you don't agree with the decision itself, that it went through some logical framework of steps. So that's a real value of frameworks. And when I talk to executives, they usually tell me, they don't have a framework, they just make decisions. It sort of comes natural to them, right? Like riding a bike or swimming. But if you dig in deeper, you actually see that there is a framework, right? They have steps, logical steps that they follow. It may be very deeply unconscious, but there is a framework. So if you're a leader, you're a manager, and you start exposing your framework to the people you work with, it makes things a little less random, right? A little less, a little less of a black box. When you tell people, hey, this is how I make decisions. I first look at alternatives, I look at data, then I do this, then I do that, and then I make a decision. So now people can actually kind of work with that, right? And start to give you some ideas within your framework and whatever your approach might be. And there's a stat here I want to share where there's an estimate now that managers actually spend about 9 hours every week simply making decisions of some kind, right? Some small, some large, some are consequential, some are not. But think about that, 9 hours, that's what, 20, 30% of their time just making decisions. How many of those could be reduced if they could rely on their team, right? If they had the information to share with the team so it's not just them making it. How many of those could be improved by just having a discussion, sort of like a debate with other people as to what the decision should be. So there's a big opportunity here to optimize how everyone makes decisions, especially if you have any kind of management level responsibility within the organization. And lastly here, I want to talk about delegation and this idea of how you improve decision making. And delegation is a big thing. And you see it more and more now as leaders try to adjust to a slightly different workplace, one that's more driven by younger individuals and what they want. And generally speaking, younger individuals, the Gen Zs, as they call, right? They typically want autonomy, a voice in how things are done. But I still meet executives that have a hard time delegating. I worked once with an executive here in British Columbia who works in tourism, and she was having a hard time delegating political decisions, right? They have to do a lot of work with the government, and they're very tricky decisions, very long-term impact, and she just couldn't really delegate them, and she was very busy because of it. And what I was sharing is that their delegation actually has to have some kind of logic to it. How do you know someone's ready to make a decision, right? What's the logic that tells you? And there's a few things I want you to consider when it's time to delegate, or you're thinking about delegating a decision. First is the information. We had a question or a comment before about information, but the person who you want to delegate to, do they actually have all the information they need to make this decision? Right? Do they have all the reports, the KPIs, the dashboards, the background? If they don't, it's impossible to make a decision. The second is speed. The fastest way to make a decision might be yourself, but another person may do it just as fast, maybe even faster. They may have fewer things on their plate. So thinking about the speed element also helps. The third is a word you hear a lot about today, which is empowerment. How you empower people, but just simply giving them a chance to develop skills and be autonomous. So if you want to do that with your team members, you're trying to prepare team members for the next role, the next title, succession, then this is a great way of doing that. And the fourth becomes risk. What is the actual risk that you're dealing with here? I once worked with a CEO who micromanaged everybody at every level. And he was micromanaging things like design decisions and marketing decisions, which have very little risk, if we're being honest. There's a lot of ways to change it. But there was no real gauge as to what were actually risky decisions, like you hire someone, long term, or you make this big investment, versus, what's going to be this design mock-up, what's going to be the name of this product, and so on. So really gauging that and starting to figure out what is the actual risk in any kind of decision. So in summary, this section, right, as you think about decision making in your organizations, right, decisions are being made, but how do you optimize it, right? We talk about decision speed, decision opportunity cost, I was mentioned before. How do you improve the speed? How do you make it more obvious? How do you make it more painful, perhaps in some cases, that the speed at which decisions are being made is too slow? We talked about frameworks. I gave you my framework. You can use it or not. But having a framework of some kind makes it much easier for everybody to know, to have a discussion as to what the decision needs to be made. And we talked about delegation. How do you actually delegate decisions if you're a leader and you're trying to get your team to be more involved? And some of those factors that get in the way of that. So, okay, questions?
Yes, we do. We
yeah.
actually have a comment and a question. So the question says, some employees, especially newer ones, may feel timid about making suggestions or sharing their ideas. Is there one thing that leaders can do other than say we have an open door and welcome ideas that you've seen work to empower employees to speak up? We get so many great ideas from staff, but it's just a few staff members that their suggestions come from.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, leaders really have to be much more proactive about it. I actually think this open door policy doesn't quite make sense in real life. I guess it used to be that, when we were all in offices, there was a physical door that was open, right? And you could actually walk through it. That's clearly not the case. I think it actually makes more sense to be much more proactive. And when leaders have their one-on-ones, when they do their group meetings, to actually be proactive and say, Josh, Claire, you've been here for 2 months, 3 months. I would love to hear what you think about this, what stands out, what doesn't, and so on and so on. And over time, that proactivity, I think, gets rewarded with proactivity from the younger employees. Keeping in mind, of course, not everyone has different preferences as to how aggressive or timid they might be in sharing ideas. Nonetheless, I think as a leader, there's a responsibility to at least check in with people and ask them, what do you think? What's been going on? And so on. And by the way, this open door policy for executives, like I said, I think that actually would be much better replaced by something like office hours, where it's not open door the entire day, but you have a set time, like once a week maybe, 1 hour where everyone can drop in or share things. That kind of stuff might actually make it a little bit easier. I think the open door policy is a little bit like those unlimited vacation policies where it sounds great in theory, but in practice, what does it actually look like? What is unlimited? Can I be gone for 9 months? Probably not, right? So something to consider about that. You said there was a comment too, or something else. A second question?
No, the comment was just said that the speed often depends on the magnitude of the decision.
Okay,
Just a
perfect.
comment.
All right, so let's move on to hybrid. Hybrid. When I've been working remote for 8 years, 9 years, and when the pandemic hit, I was sort of prepared for it, right? I was all ready to go. But not all organizations are really doing well with hybrid. Hybrid has been a real struggle for many organizations. And now we're seeing a rollback of this work from home privileges in many organizations, especially the large ones. And I think what we see is the frustrations that come from hybrid, and today I want to look at the decision-making element of it, has been too much for some organizations to deal with. And it's just much easier to roll back. And there's a McKinsey survey that showed that the most vocal supporters of hybrid environments, work from home, are actually senior executives, right? They appreciate the flexibility of being able to pick up their kids in the afternoon or do errands or whatever else they might do. So they're a small group inside organizations, but they're also highly influential. And my general gauge is that work from home is here to stay in some shape or form, whether it's 1 day, 2 days, maybe 3 days. And the best organizations are really going to figure it out. They're really going to actually change how work gets done, how decisions get done in particular, and it'll become a competitive advantage for people who want to say, I prefer to take a pay cut to get some extra hours in my day to perhaps not have a commute. So hybrid and making decisions in a hybrid environment become really crucial. So let's look at a few things. Let's see what happens when you move to hybrid. And I think the clues to success in a hybrid world actually come from this remote-first companies. They're sometimes called global distributed companies, but these are companies that are basically have always been remote from day one. They never had an office, and they just bring employees together once a year, twice a year. An example is a company that the maker of WordPress, what powers most of the websites in the world. The company is called Automatic. And Automatic was founded in 2005. They have about 2,000 employees, right? So they're a little bit bigger than a small business, maybe a medium enterprise, we might call them. And they've always been remote since the first day. And when you see in companies like this, is that they actually had to grow in different ways, right? And they value different skills. And the ones that I want to highlight are the ones related to decision making. So first, they really value writing, right? The ability to write. When you move to a hybrid world, a lot of the communication then moves to some kind of text format, whether email, instant messaging. Someone was talking about effective communication here. And if you don't know how to write well, how to write succinctly, how to make your point clearly, then you have a lot of back and forth, right? These are kind of the email threads that go on and on and on, and it's not quite clear what's going on. So be able to write well is a skill they look for. And it's something, of course, you can develop in any kind of staff, be able to provide writing courses. The second thing is a resourcefulness, an ability to kind of be a self-starter. Startups are historically full of this kind of people, that they're ready to go, they kind of make their own decisions, they can be their own island, so to speak, but they kind of look for that quality. And the third is really individuals who are fine in a remote culture. Right? They understand the drawbacks. Right? It's not all perfect. Now, organizations, as they try to think about these principles, are a little stuck because you're naturally going to have people who prefer to be in person, who want to be around colleagues, and you're going to have people who don't want that, right? I hear a lot about creative roles, for example, designers, developers. Their perspective is, hey, I'll work from home every single day, right? Don't call me, don't email me, I'll be there. You'll get the work done. But other people don't want that. So how do you find that balance, right? How do you actually make it work among those different people? So I want to share 3 ideas, just like before. The first is to think about how decisions get made in many organizations right now. It kind of follows this sort of meeting-driven approach. And what I mean by that is, in organizations that are always in person, 100% of the time, when you want to decide something, you sort of just gather people in the boardroom and then you have a conversation, right? You have a discussion. You kind of herd the people into the boardroom, and you say, okay, great. We're going to talk about marketing. We're going to talk about sales, whatever. And that meeting-driven approach also means that it's a little chaotic. Sometimes you may have an agenda. Sometimes you may not. I have heard of organizations that have like an object, and whoever's holding the object can talk, and whoever doesn't have the object cannot talk, right? Things like that, because you're trying to bring sort of order to the chaos. And because you're always in person, you can do it, right? You can meet in the morning, you can meet in the afternoon, you can meet again. People are there. You can just sort of grab people and bring them in. So you don't really need structure to make decisions. But you can imagine it's not as efficient. Now you remove people from the office, and they're in different schedules. Maybe they're on the same day, but different schedules. Now you cannot do that, right? Now you have to sort of coordinate with Tom and with Sally, and Sally's not around because she went to pick up her kids, and Tom is not around, and now you cannot really do this sort of like informal herding of people. So to move away from that, there has to be some kind of clear understanding as to how actually decisions get made. And if you look at a decision, there's things that happen before a decision is made, things that need to happen before, things that happen when the decision is being made, and things that happen after. So for example, if you're trying to decide a new marketing strategy, before, you'll need to see the latest data. Someone will need to do some analysis on it. Maybe someone will need to prepare some creatives, some lookbooks for what the campaigns could look like. Someone needs to see what the cost might be, right? Research and so on. There's all these things that can happen before. But a lot of those things can actually happen offline, right? They don't need to happen in the actual meeting. And what I see a lot of organizations do is you come together, and then someone says, okay, great, here's the research we did on markets. Here you go. But people can do that on their own, right? People can read research on their own. They can look at the latest numbers. They can read the analysis, the insights on their own. So these things happen before you actually meet. Then during the meeting itself, there should be a very strong clarity that you're getting together to decide something. Maybe not the entire strategy, but you're getting together to decide the markets you will target. You're getting ready to decide the partners you will work with, and the budget. So there's very clear decisions that are being made over whatever, 60 minutes, 30 minutes, 90 minutes. So at the end of it, everyone kind of knows this is success. Did we hit it? Did we not? Or did we just sort of talked and talked? I was actually just in a meeting this morning where I had no idea what the meeting was about. It was just a conversation. The conversation seemed useful, but nothing was decided. It was like a very pleasant conversation. And there's room for those if you want to have them, but you also want to be clear when you're actually making decisions and when you're just there to chit-chat, so to speak. And then after the decision's being made, there's things like accountabilities, next steps. People have to do something. People have to check on things. So by making the decisions very obvious, the different steps, the before, the during, and the after, you can actually start to make it much easier to make those decisions. So when you gather people in a hybrid environment, you're bringing them most likely for the during, the things that need to happen in real time, but the before and after can happen after, right? And people can kind of know that. So that's one thing to start making the hybrid a little bit more effective when it comes to decisions. The third is the second thing I want to talk about is actually this sort of outcomes versus busy work. And there's another stat actually from Microsoft this time that estimates that now individuals are spending upwards of 50% of their day in either meetings or responding to emails, responding to messages, if you have Slack, Microsoft Teams, and so on. This is a big chunk of your time that's doing sort of just responding back and forth. And there's some roles that are clearly sort of built for that. Managers in particular, right? You have to approve things, you have to unblock things. So you're more or less just responding to people. But not everyone does that. So becoming very clear to what the outcome is of any given job. You're a sales rep, your outcome is to close deals. Or you're a marketer and your outcome is to come up with ideas. Or you're in product research and your outcome is to do innovation. Being really clear what the outcomes are, what is busy work, and how do you help people avoid that, right? How do you help people minimize the time they spent in meetings that they may not be needed for, the time they spent responding to messages where they may not be needed as well, and having a much more clear distinction. And that's something I still don't see many organizations do. It's still a lot of just, let's throw more time at it, right? Let's do it more and more time, but it's not quite clear where the actual outcomes that you're trying to hit, and how do you actually make that, work. And the third thing I want to do is when it comes to hybrid, is how do you make the in-person days great, right? When people came back to the office, there were all these articles in the Wall Street Journal and so on about how offices were trying to entice people back to the office, right? They were almost putting like all this like bait, and it'd be like free coffee and free food and free babysitting, free massaging, free games. Every organization kind of became like a startup, right? With the foosball tables and the pool and so on, to sort of bring people back. But that to me kind of misses the point, right? For many people, they don't necessarily want to be social. They have a job to do. They want to work. They want to work on interesting things. So make the in-person days actually useful, right? What are the things that can only happen in person that you should definitely be planning on those days? Collaboration days, discussion days, creative work, innovation work, and do that and make it clear to employees that this is what's happening. I think the worst outcome for hybrid companies is when you bring people back into the office on set days, let's say Tuesday and Thursday, and then employees end up doing the same work they were doing at home, but now less effective, right? Because there's more distractions and so on. So now from an employee perspective, they're thinking, you brought me in, you made me commute, and I'm just on my laptop all day with headphones on. What's sort of the point of that, right? I can do that from home. So try to make those in-person days really unique and say, this is something that has to happen in person. We're going to plan for it. We're going to bring you in. And then there's a bunch of other stuff that can happen whenever you're free. You can do that from home or a coffee shop or whatever. And making that distinction really clear. And trying to avoid the stuff that seems a little too clever, right? There's like, come in and we're going to have this sort of like pizza party. I mean, maybe your employees care, maybe they don't. But just being honest, this is the kind of work that needs to happen in person, and this is what we're going to focus on in these days, and we're going to really minimize the stuff that you could easily do at home because the in-person days are so valuable. Right? Okay, any questions on the app?
No new questions. Please keep them coming.
Okay, perfect. If you have any final questions, we're in the last few minutes. Let me know, and we'll tackle them. So I just want to leave you with some final takeaways for you to think about, right? We started talking about diversity of ideas and how do you actually encourage these ideas, how you get your staff to share ideas, as many people as possible, a few ideas around that, and how the different ideas can then actually start to translate into different decisions. Right? Then we looked at decision making in general, and there's all these things that could be very intriguing. The decision speed, the opportunity cost. Are you actually moving fast enough? Is there enough clarity for your people? You may discover that your team actually has no clarity as to how decisions are made, and it's frustrating for them, and in some way actually demotivate them to not know how decisions are being made. And it may not be your intention, but something that you could actually easily change. We talk about frameworks, right? Having the right frameworks and making it clear how you make decisions and how you approach them. And whatever the framework is, making that easy for people to understand. And we talk about delegating decisions, how you actually delegate effectively. And it's a skill, really, one that I think every leader needs to have to delegate decisions and know what things can be delegated, what things they must do themselves because it's just unavoidable, and how to know the difference. And then lastly, making it all work in a hybrid world, which is kind of the world we're all living in for the most part. And we looked at this sort of meeting-driven approach, right? Trying to make decisions much more structured, less chaotic, less random, making those in-person days count, and of course, trying to make the outcomes really clear, what success is for every role, what's busy work, and at the end of the day, how do you actually judge employees and their role in the company? So if there's no other questions, I'll just do my final conclusion. Great, okay. So we'll finish a little early. And I want to finish with a story, actually, which actually highlights decision making. When I was a kid, when I was 9 or 10, I broke my right arm playing soccer. I grew up in Honduras, so the only sport we had was soccer. You sort of played soccer all the time. So I broke my right arm. You get a cast put on, no big deal. 3 months later, it comes off. And it just happened to be summer, actually, just like right now. It happened to be July. And there was a summer camp going, and after many weeks of sort of begging my mom to let me go to summer camp, she finally said, okay, fine, I'll take you to summer camp. So she drives me to summer camp, right? I had no cast, but I had just broken my arm a few months ago. And as I get out of the car, she sort of grabs my other arm, and she tells me just one thing, don't play soccer, right? So I go in, and I'm like, don't worry, I won't play soccer. So I go into summer camp, and what do you know? My friends are playing soccer, right? Only sport. And even more incredibly, they're down a player, so I think I must volunteer to sort of become this player. And they happen to actually be down a goalie, so I became the goalie for the team. Now, if you know soccer, the goalie is the only position that actually uses their arms. It's the only position, right? Every other position, you don't really need your arms. So I became the goalie. And we played the game, and my team won. I was really happy. I was actually really proud, like a very proud teenager of I proved my mom wrong, nothing happened, she was overreacting. And as I'm walking away from the net was actually a little loose, it wasn't tight, like most nets are. The net was loose, and my foot got stuck in the net, and I went forward, and I landed on my arms. And the moment I landed, my arm broke again. And it's, you feel it instantly, right? The pain. It's almost like this reminisce of what happened when you broke it. It becomes, I start crying. Eventually, my mom arrives, like an hour later, and she looks at me. I broke my arm again, and she just had one question. What were you doing? And I'm like, well, I was playing soccer. But 3 months later, it healed, and I was fine. But this is what's interesting about decisions, right? As a kid, you don't really think about decisions. So you just make them, and you live with the consequences. Even if it means a broken arm, which is really annoying in school. But I think as organizations, we can make better decisions, and we can do things a little bit differently, and not make the same decisions over and over again, right? We can strive to make different approaches to get different results, and that's what I think is really amazing. So with that, I'll let you be. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference.